Let's see who's here. I see Abigail and I see Claire. Howdy. Those are two LSAT Demon staff, and they're here to answer any questions you might have. I have a whole agenda of real LSAT questions to cover, but the first 10 minutes of all of my classes here at LSAT Demon start with just open Q&A. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm just gonna answer your questions. Somebody talk to me, please.
Your home has a very nice aesthetic.
Thank you, Shara. Hey, is it Shara or Shara?
It's Shara. I just finished listening not too long ago to your to the podcast with you and Ben, where you all was speaking about that.
Well, welcome, Shara, and thank you. Yeah, I've got all this weird wood in here. It's like a cabin type of a feel. What have you been working on?
About, oh, no, I was just going to say that you were mentioning about how when people use the word aesthetic incorrectly, it irritates you. So that's I was listening to that episode.
Yes, this is an aesthetic, and you might like the aesthetic or not like the aesthetic, but you would not say that it is so aesthetic. That is just not a correct usage of that word. I'm sorry. All right, let's get down to business. What can I help you with? Alexis has a hand up.
Hi,
Hello.
Nathan.
Hey.
Hi. I'm noticing I have this issue where I feel that I'm definitely not exhausting the games on logic games. And so I wanted to know if you had any tips for that or any indication where it would be a good place to stop.
A good place to stop?
Mm-hmm.
What are you talking about?
As far as creating different worlds.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your question. What's the purpose, Alexis? What's the purpose of making worlds?
To make the questions as easy as possible, that I don't have to redo everything.
True, but how do you know you're gonna, Harry in the chat points out that the purpose of making worlds is to eliminate rules, to get rid of rules, okay? So for example, if you had a rule like X has to go first or last, you might consider making two worlds, a world where X goes first and a world where X goes last, because then you don't have to think about that rule, X goes first or last, as you solve each of the questions. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, and I understand that, and that's what I've been trying to do in my practice. But what about those games where there's just so much flexibility where it's hard to nail down exactly?
It's a problem that solves itself. If you're not able to make worlds in a way that eliminates rules, right? If you're not able to either make worlds or split existing worlds in a way that you feel like is gonna be productive and eliminate the rule and simplify the game, then you don't make worlds. I mean, there are some games where there's almost infinite flexibility. I'm thinking about the game with the zones and the subzones. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it's got housing, industry, and retail. And there's really no good way to make worlds in that game because there's such enormous flexibility. My real answer to your question, Alexis, is that you just need to keep practicing. You will get the hang of it. Some people like to go deeper into the worlds. Some people like to just make, maybe two worlds and they've got some flexibility in them and they're going to tackle the question. A true expert is going to have all those tools in the bag. Sometimes I don't make worlds at all. Most of the time I do. When I do make worlds, sometimes it ends up being two templates. One of them, I've made one inference and the other one is wide open. Other times I'll end up making 7 worlds and they're all completely filled out. There's no one right answer to this. It's an art. And you learn that art through practice.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Cool. What else can I help y'all with? What have you been working on? What can I help with?
I have a question.
Yes.
Nathan, can you talk a little bit about the difficulty of different sections or tests? How much variation is there? I'm just asking because, like, in terms of looking at my own sort of practice tests, sometimes I feel like I kill it. Other times I'm like, well, what the hell happened? So I'm just curious, how consistent are the different tests or sections?
Well, I think it's probably you that are different, not the tests. So every LSAT student has a wide variety of has a big variance in their performance from test to test. And so, yeah, you do a section of logical reasoning today and it seems easy. You do a section of logical reasoning tomorrow and it seems hard. My hypothesis would not be that the test itself is actually different. Maybe one or two questions, can be harder or easier. But on the whole, they've constructed those sections fairly carefully, and so anyway, Austin, you really shouldn't be looking at your performance on one section. Like, who cares? I think it's meaningless. Now, let me put it back on you, Austin. What do I care about?
That I understand my mistakes.
Yes. Each individual question, y'all have to start focusing on the individual questions. I don't give a shit how you did on this test. I don't care about this section. I care about one mistake that you've made and learning the most from that one mistake. Stop with all the stasturbation and prognostication. Stop just extrapolating from limited data. Stop trying to calculate well, have I really improved or am I on track or whatever? The answer is it's impossible to tell from one test or one section. I don't know. You're not the same you today and tomorrow. Maybe the test changes in difficulty slightly, but not a lot. And what we really need to be focusing all of our time on, if we can, all of our time needs to be focused on figuring out why we're making the mistakes we're making. And we do that one question at a time. Make sense? I'd also like to give Austin a shout out. Austin is the founder of our LSAT for older students affinity group, which we just started yesterday. I think it was very successful. They've already got their own Telegram chat and everything. And I've really been interested following that and seeing how you guys are working together, making study groups, study partnerships, sharing resources. It's really amazing. We have a couple others in the works, by the way, for this coming week. LSAT for moms and LSAT for Latinas. And you guys are free to suggest. You can email me directly, nathan@lsatdemon.com. If you would like to start your own student-run affinity group inside the LSAT Demon, just email me and we'll get that going for you. I'm really excited about that. So thank you for that, Austin. Mariah, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Hi, Nathan. I just had a question about games. I'm approaching getting perfect on the games, and sure. I'm also approaching having done all of them. So I've started spending more time redoing them with different worlds or just a different strategy, like I've seen you do on your videos. But I've also just learned circle slash from Matt, and it's still a little bit uncomfortable for me. Would you, if you were to learn a new strategy like that you didn't come up with, would you suggest just continuing to try to do it that way first and then practicing another way? Or how would you kind of just build that into your skill set, I guess?
You need as many tools as possible in the bag. It can be confusing at first because you're digging through the bag, do I use this or that or this other thing? And it can be kind of bewildering at first. But when you add more tools to your toolkit, eventually you will effortlessly, almost without even thinking about it, you'll just sort of naturally pick the right tool for the job. So I would just encourage you to keep trying games in lots of different ways, and eventually something will stick. It's They give you all the information you need to answer every question on every logic game with 100% certainty. And what you really need to focus on is having a loose, improvisational approach to the games. The truth is, it doesn't matter what tool you use. It matters that you don't freeze up and you just move forward on a solution to the game. Doesn't have to be the perfect one. You just have to put the pieces together, do the game, and move on to the next one. There's no such thing as perfect. But I love, Mariah, that you're doing the same game, multiple different ways. I think that's probably the best way to learn which of the tools you're most comfortable with. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Excellent. Amanda, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
Good. Happy Tuesday. Thanks for hosting this. Sorry. Oh my gosh. I have a quick question about, well, not quick. I'm having issues with and or in logic games. And I am missing the inferences, and I'm really struggling with that and diagramming that.
What do you mean and or? What do you mean?
Like when you're given a rule and it says and then let me actually look at one of them.
I need the entire rule. I can't just take one word out of context.
Sure.
I need the entire rule.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so if Emily and Chris are hired, then Frank cannot be hired. If Emily and Frank are hired, then Chris cannot be hired.
One ticket, one rule at a time. What was the first one?
If Emily and Chris are hired, then Frank cannot be hired.
Okay, so what's the trigger? What is the trigger on that rule? What's the thing that when it happens, it forces another thing to happen? What's the trigger on the rule? Or another way of saying that is sufficient condition. But what's the trigger on this rule?
Emily and Chris are the trigger. They both are the trigger.
Yeah, they have to both be hired to trigger the rule. Just one of them doesn't do shit.
Right.
Both of them have to be hired. Then the rule is triggered. Then what happens?
Well, then Frank cannot be hired. So then your necessary condition is triggered.
Okay. So what's the problem?
The problem is or. So I'm reading these. I have so many.
Give me an or
books.
rule.
There is no or in this one, I guess. But
okay, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you, Amanda. If you want to look up an or rule, I'm happy to talk about the or rule. I mean,
but I don't. So it's not and or then I don't have to change it because when I'm reading a book, it's saying that when you have the and the or mirror each other.
I have no idea what that's all about.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
It's simpler
all
than
right.
you think.
So if I just do it like the way I know how to do it with and both of them are the trigger.
And if it said or.
Right. And it doesn't.
But
I'm getting confused. I'm thinking I have to actually change it to or.
Throw away whatever book you're reading.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If it had said or, then what would you do? If it had said what were the two names again?
Emily and Chris.
Emily and Chris. So if it said if Emily or Chris are hired, then what would be the trigger on the rule?
One of them.
Yeah, or maybe both of them. But
or maybe both.
When the first one of them gets hired, right, then it triggers the rule.
Correct. Okay. All right. Makes sense.
Thank you for your question. You're getting confused with, and when you do the contrapositive, okay, which is something that I don't even do anymore.
Right.
How long has it been since you've seen me do a contrapositive on the board? Like never. It's LSAT dogma, but it's something that I just don't even do anymore because I think that I've found more efficient ways to think about the test.
Right.
But yeah, when you do the contrapositive, and turns into or, and or turns into and.
Right.
But that's when you do the contrapositive, and it's really, if we use worlds, you don't even ever have to do the contrapositive anyway.
Makes sense.
We got simpler ways of dealing with.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, let's move along. Unless Abigail, Claire, anything in the chat that I need to address?
Nothing that I'm seeing.
Okay, these are both professional LSAT tutors. You can message them directly if you want to have sidebar conversations without muddying up the whole entire chat. If you have something that you would like to ask to me and to the entire group, please go ahead and do put that into the public chat. It's real hard for me to handle, direct messages while I'm teaching the class. Thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to those of you who have your cameras on. It makes me a much better teacher if I can get some nonverbal feedback and see who's getting it and who's not getting it. I think it makes you a better student as well, because it's a lot harder to flake out, and get distracted when you have that green light staring you in the face and you're part of the group. So thank you for those of you who are able to keep their cameras on during class. The syllabus for today is in the chat. For accommodated students, we post these syllabi way in advance. So for, if you decide to join the Demon, you'll be able to work on these questions at your leisure. We're going to start with an easier logical reasoning question. We're going to have a poll like we do in all my classes these days. We'll have a poll where you can tell me which answer choices you think are worthy of discussion. So don't just tell me what you picked. If there was something that you struggled with, I would like to know about that. Do your best on this question, fill out the poll, and as soon as we get like 75% completion of the poll, then I'll go ahead with an explanation. All right, good luck, have fun. All right, I would love a little bit more participation in our survey. We made it up to 58% there. I'd like to see that more like 75%. So if you're here doing the question, please fill out the survey and let me know which answers you'd like me to spend more time on. This is test 65, section 4, question 1. When a forest is subject to acid rain, the calcium level in the soil declines. Okay, if you say so. That's a conditional statement. Whenever a forest is subject to acid rain, then I know for sure that the calcium level in that soil has to decline. I don't know how much. I don't know what the starting level of calcium is. You know, I don't know what the end result is. I just know that it has to be something less than it was before. Spruce, fir, and sugar maple trees all need calcium to survive. If you say so, you know, you connect those two ideas together and you get an inkling that acid rain might be particularly bad for spruce, fir, and sugar maple trees, at least to the extent that they need calcium, and acid rain tends to decrease soil calcium. But be careful. It's not, you know, you don't get to just leap to some conclusion that therefore anytime there's acid rain, spruce, fir, and sugar maples do terribly, because if they're in soil that had a huge amount of calcium to begin with, maybe they're fine, or maybe they don't need very much calcium, so the calcium level can decline and these trees could still do fine as far as we know. However, sugar maples in forests that receive significant acid rain are much more likely to show signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency than are spruces or firs in such forests, and that sets up a bit of a mystery for us. I am expecting this to be a paradox question because we have a puzzling set of circumstances. Spruce, fir, and sugar maple trees all need calcium to survive. Acid rain tends to deplete the amount of calcium in soil, but sugar maples do worse on the calcium deficiency than do spruces or firs in the same forest. What's up? Well, maybe sugar maple trees need more calcium than spruces and firs. Like, they all need it, but maybe sugar maple trees have a real high amount that they normally need. Or, you know, it could even be something bizarre. Like, what if acid rain had other characteristics that was actually good for spruces or firs? Like, yes, acid rain decreases the amount of calcium in the soil, but acid rain adds to the amount of phosphorus in the soil, which helps spruces and firs process calcium more efficiently. Something like that would be a great explanation. I could go on all day with 100 different explanations, but I'm not going to. The important bit here is that I know what paradox I'm trying to explain, which is, hey, why are the sugar maples doing worse on the calcium deficiency than the spruces and firs? And I've come up with a couple of possible explanations. The correct answer doesn't have to match exactly my prediction, but it's going to be that same type of thing where it's going to basically scratch the itch. The itch is, hey, why are sugar maples doing worse? The correct answer is going to satisfy that. It's going to say, oh, well, here's a good explanation for why the sugar maples are doing worse than the spruces and the firs. A says, soil in which, oh, by the way, I didn't read the question, did I? I predicted the question. Which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the greater decline among sugar maples? Explain, really important word there. This is a paradox question. We have to know what the mystery is, and we have to explain that mystery. A, soil in which calcium levels are significantly diminished by acid rain is also likely to be damaged in other ways by acid rain. You know, if that's the case, maybe they should, all the different species of trees should be doing terribly. I don't see how A, in the slightest, explains why sugar maples specifically are doing worse than the spruces and the firs. That is not a satisfying explanation to the mystery that we were asked to explain. B, sugar maples that do not receive enough calcium deteriorate less rapidly than spruces or firs that do not receive enough calcium, that actually makes the paradox worse. I mean, they said sugar maples in forests that receive significant acid rain are much more likely to show signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency. B says sugar maples should actually do better in conditions of calcium deficiency. So that's surely not an explanation. C, spruces and firs, unlike sugar maples, can extract calcium from a mineral compound that is common in soil and is not affected by acid rain. This is a perfect answer for this paradox question. It's a difference between sugar maples and the other two species of trees. And it's a difference that helps explain why the spruces and firs might not be doing so poorly in acid rain conditions. They have another way basically to get to the calcium. The sugar maples don't have that way of getting to this alternate route to getting the calcium. That's why sugar maples are observed to do worse in forests that are subject to acid rain. It's a perfect answer because it's a satisfying explanation to the paradox. D says sugar maples require more calcium in the spring and summer than they do in the fall and winter. What's that have to do with acid rain? What's that have to do with why they're doing worse? I'm glad that it looks like none of you in the class were interested in that answer at all. E says, unlike spruces or firs, most sugar maples are native to areas that receive a lot of acid rain. Well, if they were native to an area that receives a lot of acid rain, wouldn't they have evolved like a coping mechanism for acid rain? To me, E doesn't explain anything. Why would they do worse if they're native to areas that get acid rain? It's not an explanation. It actually makes the paradox worse. So I think both B and E make the paradox worse. D and A just aren't helpful. They just don't scratch the itch. The answer here is C, because it's the only one that gives a satisfying explanation for the paradox, which was, why are sugar maples doing worse? Is that clear? Any follow-ups? You really only have 3 responsibilities if you study with the LSAT demon. You need to show up, you need to try your hardest, and you need to tell us when you don't understand things. So there's no shame in it. If you ever struggle, please ask questions. If you're too shy to ask questions out loud or in the chat, you can private chat to Abigail or to Claire, and they will sort you out. But like if this question, it's a pretty easy question. If this question is not perfectly clear, your primary goal for today is to understand this question. That's one that everybody should get right. All right. Okay. Next one is in the chat. Good luck. Test 65, section 4, question 2. Syndicated political columnists often use their newspaper columns to try to persuade readers to vote a certain way. Often just means sometimes, so they don't always do this. It's but they don't never do it, right? So sometimes, often means sometimes, and sometimes means one or more times. So this is a thing that happens sometimes. It could be all the time as far as we know. I just know that it definitely has to happen sometimes. However, it says, their efforts to persuade voters rarely succeed. Really? For by the time such a column appears, nearly all who will vote in the election will have already made a decision about which candidate to vote for. That makes sense, but our job is not to agree. Our job is to disagree. If you're going to be a lawyer, you need to learn to be a pain in the ass. Okay, this seems clear to whoever's making the argument, but when you get lawyers in the room, nothing is clear anymore. I understand where you're going with this, that if people have already made a decision, maybe this column won't sway them. But people can change their mind. And if the column was particularly compelling, maybe I've made up my mind, but I read the column and I realize that I was wrong and I changed my mind before I vote. The question says, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? And yeah, I mean, my objection here was, how do you know people won't change their mind? The argument seems to assume that if you've already made up your mind, then you cannot be swayed by this column, which just doesn't have to be true. They never presented a premise that said people never change their minds. So this argument has assumed that the column isn't going to get people to change their minds. A, syndicated columnists influence the votes of most of their readers who have not yet decided. This argument is entirely about the people who have decided. The argument does not assume that these columns are effective on the people who haven't yet decided. In fact, if anything, that would just weaken the argument. So the author does not have to agree with A, which means A is not a necessary assumption of the argument. It's actually a weakener, y'all. B, the attempts of syndicated political columnists to persuade readers to vote a certain way in an election can instead cause them to vote a different way. Again, you know, that's exactly the problem with the argument, is that B is possible. If B is a fact, it hurts this argument. The author does not have to agree with A or B. I read both A and B, excuse me, both A and B as weakeners. C says, people who regularly read columns by syndicated political columnists mainly read those written by columnists with whom they already largely agree. We know that this is true in real life. But it's not a necessary assumption of the argument. The author does not have to agree that people are normally in their own bubble. If C was true, I do think it would strengthen the argument. Like, how are these columns going to change anybody's mind if people only read shit that they already agree with? But the author said nothing about that. The author was not contemplating media bubbles, and the author doesn't have to agree that people are only reading shit that they agree with. D, regular readers of columns by syndicated political columnists are less likely to be persuaded to vote a certain way by such columns than are people who seldom read such columns. Why does the author have to agree with that? Where did the author talk about people who commonly read these columns and people who seldom read these columns and make a comparison of the different reaction that these people have? The author does not have to agree with D. We're looking for one that we can prove, y'all. We're looking for one that the author has to agree with based on what they've already said. E, people rarely can be persuaded to change their minds about which candidate to vote for once they have made a decision. a perfect answer. The author has to agree that E is true. And I predicted that one. You know, it's just, how do I make that prediction? I make that prediction by attacking the argument. The argument said, hey, you know, people have already made up their mind, so these columns aren't going to be effective. Well, that only makes sense if you agree that people can't be persuaded to change their mind. Entirely predictable, easy question. The answer is E. The analysis for necessary assumption questions. Which one does the author have to agree with? That's all you need to think about. Forget about assumption negation or anything else you've learned from anybody else. Which one does the author have to agree with? It's the simplest route to the correct answer. And an even simpler route is you attack these arguments and you tell them how they might be wrong, because here, my objection to the argument is directly related to the correct answer. You guys feel that? If you can feel that, you're on the right track, okay? If you get that, if you get like, well, they haven't necessarily proved their argument because, hey, what if people can change their mind? And if you can react that way to this argument, then no matter what type of question they ask you, you're already like 75% of the way to the correct answer. So good. If you're feeling that, good. And if you're not feeling that, you need to learn how to feel that, because that's really the game we're playing on logical reasoning. Disagree. Be contrary. Don't accept anybody's bullshit. Tell them why, even if their facts are true, their conclusion can still be wrong. And if you do that, you're answering the question before the question has even been asked. Sammy, got a hand up?
Yeah, hi, sorry. I just want, like, can you go over again, sort of compare C and E, like why C is wrong? Like I chose C. You said it would kind of strengthen the argument, but like, why is it the wrong answer specifically?
What's the analysis, Sammy, on a necessary assumption question?
What does the author have to assume to be true in order for the argument to work?
No, that's not what I said, Sammy.
Sorry.
I just said it. Somebody want to help? What is the analysis? Or Sammy, you can try again. What's the analysis for a necessary assumption question?
I apologize. Sorry, it's like my second week study. I'm like,
no problem. And I'm not. We're just here to learn. I'm not judging or attacking.
Yeah,
sorry. What's the analysis on a necessary assumption question? Yes, everybody in the chat is chiming in. Which one does the author have to agree with? The author has to agree with E. The author does not have to agree with C. I mean, the author would love if C was true, because if people are inside their own media bubble, then it seems, you know, that would make it less likely that a column was going to change their mind. They're only reading shit that they already agree with. So C certainly helps the argument, but that's not the analysis. This isn't a strengthening question. This is a necessary assumption question. Which one does the author have to agree with? C is wrong because you have no evidence that the author must agree with C.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Rebecca, hand up.
Yeah, so sorry, I apologize for the noise. So I had previously answered this question and I got it right today, but I got it wrong like 3 times in a row. And finally, I just, selected the help button the first time I did it like a month ago. And so when I came across it again today, I recognized why I got it wrong the first time, but what did catch me up, I think was probably for the same reason. And by that, I mean, answer E, it gave me, I guess the way I read it, and maybe I read it wrong, but when I first answered this question, I ended up just kind of guessing through because none of the answers seemed right. And that's because the way I read it, answer E was that someone could change their vote. And I understand that it talks about like,
I see. You're reading. Okay, I'm going to mute you, Rebecca. Your sound is horrible. I understand your question. Thank you for your question. You're reading rarely wrong. You're reading rarely to mean like this can happen sometimes. That's not what they intended when they put rarely in E. What they meant was, this doesn't happen very much. So you're reading E as a weakener. Like if rarely had said frequently, E would definitely be a weakener. If E said sometimes, I think it also would be a weakener. But their use of rarely there means that this doesn't happen very often. And the conclusion of the argument was voters are rarely persuaded by these columns. So that matches actually E perfectly. It's literally the same word. And yeah, the author has to agree that people rarely change their mind because they're because they're concluding that these columns are rarely persuasive. I hope that
wouldn't have anything to do with, I mean, what I was getting at is the fact that when I read it, what I was thinking is, well, people can't change their vote after they've already voted. Not
has
necessarily
nothing to do
that
with
they're
changing
lying
your vote after the election. I gotta mute you, Rebecca. Your sound is just awful. I'm sorry. Okay, let's move. And by the way, Rebecca, you can use the ask button. You can chat to Abigail, you can chat to Claire. We will sort you out on this issue, but we gotta move along to reading comprehension. So we got a reading comp passage coming at you in the chat. There it is. The way I like to teach reading comprehension is via demonstration. So I am going to read you this passage, and I'm going to have the type of conversation with this author that I would be having in real life if I was sitting for the LSAT. I'm going to do it out loud, which takes a lot longer. By the way, for those of you who think that reading out loud helps you, it does not. It takes way longer to read out loud than it does to read in your head. So reading out loud is not, it's not your friend, and you're not allowed to do it on the LSAT unless you get special accommodations. So please practice reading in your head. I'm going to read this passage to you out loud, and I'm going to discuss it as I go. And the idea is that once I've read the passage to you, the questions should probably be easy. The main thing I'm looking for here is, why does this document exist? What does this author want? It's test 65, the third passage. It says the following passages are adapted from articles recently published in North American Law Review journals. Oh God, these are going to be boring. Passage A. In Canadian and United States common law, blackmail is unique among major crimes. Okay, unique. You know, literal definition means there's nothing else like it. Another meaning would be special or different. Okay, so why is blackmail in Canada and US, why is it unique among major crimes? Well, no one has yet adequately explained why it ought to be illegal. Okay, I was actually expecting to be bored, but now I'm not, because if blackmail, you know, I know what blackmail is, right? We see it on TV or movies or whatever all the time. You've got some dirt on somebody and you're like, hey, pay me or I'm going to release this information. That's blackmail. But apparently nobody can explain why it ought to be illegal. Why is that? The heart of the problem, known as the Blackmail Paradox, is that two acts, each of which is legally permissible separately, become illegal when combined. That's very interesting. I can think of another example. You know, being naked is legal in your own home, and being on an elementary school campus is legal. But those two things combined, probably illegal. So blackmail apparently is similar. If I threaten to expose a criminal act or embarrassing private information, unless I am paid money, I have committed blackmail. Yeah, I get it. I know what it is from, again, movies. But the right to free speech protects my right to make such a disclosure. And in many circumstances, I have a legal right to seek money. Like you can, you know, require that people pay for an LSAT demon subscription, or whatever. Your job has to pay you. You can demand that money. All right. So why is it illegal then to combine them? The first paragraph ends with this rhetorical question, and what it does is it primes me to expect an an answer to that question, right? I got to think that somebody's going to try to explain why it is that these two things are illegal when you combine them. Legal separately, illegal when you combine them. The lack of a successful theory of blackmail has damaging consequences. Well, maybe they're not going to explain it. Instead, they're going to go on about the consequences of not really knowing why we think blackmail should be illegal. It says, drawing a clear line between legal and illegal acts has proved impossible without a successful theory of blackmail. Consequently, most blackmail statutes broadly prohibit behavior that no one really believes is criminal and rely on the good judgment of prosecutors not to enforce relevant statutes precisely as written. And I think we all can probably agree that that is problematic. You're going to write a law. It says explicitly in the criminal code that shit is illegal, that no one believes should actually be illegal. And then you're going to rely on prosecutors to use good judgment on who they prosecute. Well, we know that there are criminal prosecutors all across the country who are totally corrupt and racist and trying to, you know, stuff people in jail who don't deserve it. Like, it sounds like an enormous, not obviously, I don't think every prosecutor is like that, but there are enough prosecutors out there that would love to put people in prison for no good reason that this seems extremely dangerous. It is possible, however, to articulate a coherent theory of blackmail. Okay, great. This is what I've been waiting for. Give me an explanation for what blackmail is and why it should be illegal. The key to the wrongness of the blackmail transaction is its triangular structure. Really? What do you mean triangular? Well, the blackmailer obtains what he wants by using a supplementary leverage that depends on a third party. Immediately, I think about an example of blackmail, okay? Suppose I know that you cheated on your wife. I say, hey, listen, I'm gonna tell your wife unless you give me 10 grand. The triangular structure there, I'm using supplementary leverage. Your wife, she's gonna be pissed. And I'm using her as leverage to extract money from you. That's the triangular structure that this author is talking about. The blackmail victim pays to avoid being harmed by persons other than the blackmailer. For example, when a blackmailer threatens to turn in a criminal unless paid money, the blackmailer is bargaining with the state's chip, just like I was bargaining with your wife's chip in my previous example. Thus, blackmail is criminal because it involves the misuse of a third party for the blackmailer's own benefit. The very last sentence there is the definition of blackmail according to passage A, or the rationale for our theory of blackmail. Why is blackmail a crime? Well, because it involves the misuse of a third party for the blackmailer's benefit. Fairly straightforward. We have a blackmail paradox, which is, hey, these two things are legal separately, but they're illegal when combined. How come? And in the very last paragraph of passage A, the author promotes a theory of blackmail. Well, yeah, if you're misusing, you know, the another person in order to benefit yourself, that's why we've decided to make this illegal. If you want to just tell the wife that somebody's cheating, you can do that. And if you want to ask the cheater for money, you can do that too. But when you do the same thing at the same time, you do those things at the same time, now you're misusing, it becomes a triangular structure, yeah. All right, passage B, I'm sure that it's got to be about blackmail. I'd be shocked if it wasn't. Passage B says, classical Roman law had no special category for blackmail. Okay, so we're going way back in history. They didn't even have a category for blackmail. It wasn't necessary. Really interesting, because blackmail does seem pretty bad. If everybody was allowed to just go around and blackmail everybody all the time, that would be pretty tough. But apparently it wasn't necessary under classical Roman law. How come? Well, Roman jurists began their evaluation of specific categories of actions by considering whether the action caused harm, not by considering the legality or illegality of the action itself. So maybe under classical Roman law, it was just against the law to tell somebody's wife that they were cheating. The court would go, it causes harm, can't do that. No blackmail problem, if that's your rule. Now, I'm not saying that's a good rule. That's a stupid rule, because then anything you did that caused harm, you would be liable for, which, you know, like telling the truth, or like point the cops, like there's a murderer on the loose, and you go like, yeah, the guy went that way, and now you've caused harm to that guy, so now you're liable for it. I mean, that doesn't sound like a good system, but I can see why it would obviate the need for a blackmail law. Second paragraph of passage B. Their assumption, true enough it seems, was that a victim of blackmail would be harmed if shameful but private information were revealed to the world. Yeah, you're cheating on your wife, that does damage. I get it. And if the shame would cause harm to the person's status or reputation, then prima facie, that means on its face, just means like obviously without any deeper analysis. The threatened act of revelation was unlawful. So you did harm, simple analysis, it's unlawful. The burden of proof shifted to the possessor of the information. The party who had or threatened to reveal shameful facts had to show positive cause for the privilege of revealing the information. So, okay, I like this. There's an exception to the rule. So like if it's a murderer, you know, I imagine that there was probably an exception, like it's okay to tell the cops when there's a murderer running down the street. You've got privileged information. Yes, it is going to harm that person, but you qualify for this privilege of divulging the information. That would make sense. Last paragraph of passage B says, in short, assertion of the truth of the shameful act being revealed was not in itself sufficient to constitute a legal privilege. So the fact that someone cheated on their wife, even if you could prove it, that does not by itself allow you the privilege. So what does allow you the privilege? Granted, truth was not wholly irrelevant. False disclosures were granted even less protection than true ones. Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, if you're lying about somebody, that's a whole different thing. But even if it were true, the revelation of shameful information was protected only if the revelation had been made for a legitimate purpose and dealt with a matter that the public authorities had an interest in having revealed. This is a perfect example, you know, using my cheating on the wife and murderer example, I can see how murderer, probably that you're making that revelation, he went that way. There is a legitimate purpose dealing with a matter that the public authorities had an interest in. On the other hand, you cheated on your wife, tell the wife, is that really a public matter? I can see how that would not qualify for the exception. Just because something shameful happened to be true did not mean it was lawful to reveal it. Yeah, there has to be this public interest. Okay, so passage A is explicitly about blackmail the whole way through. It's talking about modern US and Canadian law. The purpose of passage A is to tell you, hey, we got this problem, blackmail paradox. Nobody really knows why it's illegal. Two things that are independently legal become illegal when combined. Last paragraph says, well, yeah, that's because of the triangular structure. Basically, you're misusing somebody else for your own benefit. Passage B doesn't talk about the modern blackmail paradox at all. Passage B just tells us about a quirk of classical Roman law where we had a whole different standard, where it wasn't these two things are both separately legal. It sounds like there wasn't really any free speech protection under classical Roman law. Instead, if you reveal harmful information, the burden now is on you to prove that you had a privilege to divulge that damaging information. And if you didn't, it's just illegal, which means that we don't need to even talk about blackmail. There wasn't a need for blackmail, a specific blackmail law under classical Roman law, because you didn't have that problem of two things that are independently legal, but illegal when combined. Okay, from there, I think these questions, almost all of them should be a piece of cake. We're going to have a survey. You can tell us which ones gave you trouble, and I will explain whichever ones were the hardest. All right, good luck. All righty, let's dive on in here. Looks like question 19 was the toughest one, so I will start there. It's test 65, passage 3, question 19. The relationship between the ways in which Canadian and US common law and classical Roman law treat blackmail, as described in the passages, is most analogous to the relationship between which one of the following pairs. If you struggled with this question, I guarantee you went into the answer choices right away. It's not that hard of a question. The first step here is to understand the relationship between Canadian and US common law blackmail compared to ancient Roman law blackmail. In ancient Roman law, there was no problem with blackmail. Ancient Roman law had its own issues, obviously, but their treatment of blackmail, they didn't even have blackmail because you just weren't allowed to divulge damaging information unless you had a privilege. Under US and Canadian common law, we have free speech, which means you are allowed to divulge basically any information you want. And you're also allowed to ask for money. But the problem with blackmail is that when you combine those two things together, now you're using a third party as leverage for your own benefit. And that's why, according to the author of passage A, that's why it's illegal under US and Canadian common law. So again, we have special treatment under US and Canadian law because of free speech. Under Roman law, classical Roman law, you didn't even have a blackmail issue because you just weren't allowed to divulge the information to begin with. So understanding that relationship, now I'm going to go into the answer choices looking for a similar relationship. A says, one country legally requires anyone working as a carpenter to be licensed and insured. Another country has no such requirement. I mean, it's analogous only to the extent that in one country there is a law against it, and in the other country there's no law. But that's actually not even quite right, because under classical Roman law, blackmail was prohibited. It just was prohibited without a specific reference to blackmail. It was prohibited under a broader restriction. A just doesn't even have any restriction at all, which just makes it different. B, one country makes it illegal to use cell phones on trains. Another country makes it illegal to use cell phones on both trains and buses. You know, I'm just not seeing an analogy there. Both countries have the exact same law against using cell phones on trains. One of the countries has an additional law about buses. I don't see how that's analogous. C, one country legally allows many income tax deductions and exemptions. Another country legally allows relatively few deductions and exemptions. That's a difference in the law, but it's not. Think about what happened. US and Canadian common law have specific restrictions against blackmail. Classical Roman law did not have a specific restriction against blackmail, but blackmail was still restricted via another mechanism, which was basically just the restriction on speech. So I don't see anything analogous in C either. C seems like a different level of restriction. I'm looking for the same level of restriction, but it's through different mechanisms. D, one country makes it illegal for felons to own guns. Another country has no such ban because it makes gun ownership illegal for everyone but police and the military. That's a perfect answer. US and Canadian law are like making it illegal for felons to own guns. They have a specific blackmail restriction. It's illegal to do this thing. Felon with a gun or doing blackmail, that's illegal. Classical Roman law is like having no ban on blackmail because it makes gun ownership illegal for everyone but police and the military. We're doing the same thing. In both cases, we are banning felons from having guns. In one case, we're doing it explicitly, and in the other case, we're just making it illegal for anybody to have a gun, except for some exceptions, which is parallel to the privilege of divulging damaging information analysis that happened under classical Roman law. It's an analogous situation, so that's our answer. E says, one country makes it illegal to drive motorcycles with racing grade engines on its roads. Another country legally permits such motorcycles, but fines you if you blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. Blackmail was illegal under classical Roman law because it was illegal to divulge damaging information. Blackmail is illegal under Canadian and US common law because there's a specific prohibition against blackmail. E is like, well, it's legal in one place and illegal in another place. That's not analogous at all. The answer here is D, because it's the only one that matches the idea that we're going to prohibit blackmail in both places, but we're going to use completely different mechanisms in those places. Okay, I'll do number 16 next. Looks like that was the second most commonly requested. Test 65, passage 3, question 16. Which one of the following statements is most strongly supported by information given in the passages? This is the most common type of question on reading comp. All it's asking you is which one of these was in these passages. Like, which one can you point to evidence for? And you don't necessarily have to go back and show me exactly where the evidence is. You just have to know, yeah, that's what they said at some point in one of these passages. That's what they said. So did they say at some point that in Roman law there was no blackmail paradox? Well, yeah. Did they say that that was because free speech protections comparable to those in Canadian and US common law were not an issue? Yeah. If you knew somebody was cheating on their wife, that's damaging information. Under classical Roman law, you were not allowed to reveal that information. So there is no blackmail because it's illegal already to just tell the wife. In the US and Canada, it would be legal to tell the wife. It would be illegal to blackmail, though. So there is no blackmail problem in classical Roman law because they just didn't have the free speech protections. And the answer there is going to be A. B says blackmail was more widely practiced in Roman antiquity than it is now. We have, come on, you got no evidence whatsoever for that. In fact, it sounds like revealing damaging information was pretty much verboten in under classical Roman law. And so I doubt, and I also probably think that the punishments were way worse back then, like you would get crucified, for example, which is not good. And so I don't see any evidence for blackmail was more widely practiced. C, in general, Canadian and US common law grant more freedoms than classical Roman law granted. That, very likely is true in real life. It did not say that anywhere in the passage, though. And I specifically hate the beginning of C. In general, I don't know anything in general. I know about their specific treatment of blackmail. That's all I really know. So I don't have any justification for the really strong language in the beginning of C. D, the best justification for the illegality of blackmail in Canadian and US common law is the damage blackmail can cause to the victim's reputation. That's not at all what it said. Passage A explicitly said that the reason why we make this illegal is that it involves the misuse of a third party for the blackmailer's own benefit. The entirety of passage A doesn't say that there's anything wrong with telling somebody that they're telling a wife that she's being cheated on. That's not why it's illegal. It's illegal because of the misuse of a third party. There's no support for D. E, unlike Roman law, Canadian and US common law do not recognize the interest of public authorities in having certain types of information revealed. You don't have any evidence for that. There could be all kinds of laws on the books in the US and Canada about when certain public authorities have a certain interest in having information revealed. You don't know that that's not true, so you can't pick E. On reading comp generally, we're going for safe, boring, obvious, conservatively stated answers. And here, A is the only one that I would feel comfortable standing up in court and saying, well, yeah, passage B says that you just weren't allowed to reveal damaging information. And if that's the case, then you don't have a blackmail paradox anymore. So the answer is A. All right, one more. Let me see if I can do this quick. By the way, when you hit submit on question number 19, you're going to see an ask button. That ask button will give you a written explanation within 24 hours for any of these questions. So if you struggled with any of them, just hit the ask button and the team will get you sorted out if they're not already there. I mean, my guess is that there's probably already written explanations. Test 65, passage 3, question 15. In using the phrase, the state's chip in line 29, the author of passage A most clearly means to refer to a government's, well, you know, the whole point here was the misuse of another power, right? And when they said bargaining with the state's chip, what they meant was, you know, hey, I know that you cheated on your taxes, and I'm going to tell the government that you cheated on your taxes unless you pay me money. Well, what I'm doing there is I'm using the power of the state to compel you to pay your taxes or penalties or interest or even put you in prison. So bargaining with the state's chip meant misusing the state's power to compel, you know, to prison or whatever. A, legal authority to determine what actions are crimes. No, I'm looking for power over you that they can punish you or make you do shit you don't want to do. B, legitimate interest in learning about crimes committed. What? C, legitimate interest in preventing crimes before they occur. What? All right, so I'm not understanding these answers. D, exclusive reliance on private citizens as a source of important information. No, the state's chip meant, well, if they find out about this, they're going to want to punish you for it. E, legal ability to compel its citizens to testify in court. You know, if that said go to prison, I would love it, but compel you to testify in court wasn't ever mentioned. Okay, so this happens from time to time. I get through all 5 answers and I don't like any of them. That's because 4 out of 5 answers are wrong and I expect answers to be wrong. So I don't really spend a lot of time with answers that I don't understand. Going back through the answer choices quickly, I know for sure that it's not about their ability. A says, you know, their ability to make laws. It's not about their ability to make laws. Rereading B, legitimate interest in learning about crimes committed in its jurisdiction. Okay, I can at least make a case for B. Does the government have a legitimate interest in learning that you murdered or whatever, cheated on your taxes? They do. They do have a legitimate interest in preventing those things. Our whole society crumbles if we allow murder to happen without punishment. They have a legitimate interest in learning about these crimes, but if you were to blackmail somebody for that crime, you're bargaining with the state's chip. Yeah, the chip wants to know about, or sorry, yes, the state wants to know about this murder. But you don't get to use their legitimate interest in knowing about the murder for your own benefit. That's the whole point about the why blackmail is illegal. So the answer here is B. I didn't like it at first, but I hate A, C, D, and E. So I can kind of back into the correct answer there and get it right, even though I didn't love the correct answer at first blush. I'm just not going to pick any of the rest of those answers. All right, we got to keep it moving. Please use Abigail and Claire and the ask button. There are existing explanations already in the daemon, I'm sure. Use all of those resources to review the rest of these questions. We're moving on into harder logical reasoning. One of them is in the chat. Please do it and fill out our survey. Thanks. Test 65, section 4, question 25. Litsina says, because futuristic science fiction does not need to represent current social realities. I'm thinking like COVID, right? If you're writing sci-fi, you don't need to talk about COVID because that's about to be a thing of the past, hopefully. Okay, anyway, because futuristic science fiction does not need to represent current social realities, its writers can envisage radically new social arrangements, whatever those may be. Thus, it has the potential to be a richer source of social criticism than is conventional fiction. Wait, Litsina, really? I mean, you presented one difference between futuristic science fiction and conventional fiction. I guess you're telling me that conventional fiction does need to represent current social realities where future science fiction does not. But why does that mean that sci-fi has to be a richer source of social criticism? One current social reality is that we've never had a woman president of the United States. I might write a crazy futuristic sci-fi novel where an actual woman became the president of the United States. Oh my God. That's not a current social reality since we've never had one. I mean, obviously we will very soon, but that's not a current social reality. So I can envisage a radically new social arrangement with a woman president of the United States, but that doesn't mean that that's a richer source of social criticism than today's conventional fiction. I mean, sure, maybe in today's conventional fiction, you have to have a male president of the United States, but you can still criticize the shit out of that system. I'm not sure I follow Litsina's argument. Priscilla says that futuristic science fiction writers more skillfully envisage radically new technologies than new social arrangements shows how writers' imaginations are constrained by current realities. Okay, so Priscilla actually disagrees with one of Litsina's premises. Litsina seems to think that these futuristic science fiction authors are able to envisage radically new social arrangements. Priscilla says, no, they've got warp drives and hyperspace and laser guns and all kinds of weird future tech, but they do that part skillfully, and they are much less skillful at thinking about new social arrangements. So that's attacking a premise of Litsina's argument. Because of this limitation, the most effective social criticism results from faithfully presenting the current social realities for critical examination, as happens in conventional fiction. So Priscilla disagrees with both Litsina's premise that sci-fi writers are good at envisaging radically new social arrangements, and her conclusion that sci-fi is better at social criticism for that reason. Priscilla says, no. When they do that, they do a shitty job of it. And so therefore, it's actually better to just use conventional fiction to faithfully represent current social realities. Litsina and Priscilla disagree with each other about which one of the following. So I'm looking for a yes from one of them and a no from the other one. A says, some science fiction writers have succeeded in envisaging convincing, radically new social arrangements. Litsina seems to agree that that is true. The problem with A is that you can't go all the way to saying that Priscilla disagrees with A. Some is really hard to disagree with. Some means one or more. So where does it say that Priscilla says no science fiction writer has ever done this successfully? Priscilla said that they normally are less skillful at it, but that's not the same thing as saying nobody has ever done it skillfully, which means I can't pick A. B says writers of conventional fiction are more skillful than are writers of futuristic science fiction. That's way too broad. They were only talking about how skillfully we are representing current or future social realities. B is not about just the limited social envisaging social realities, social arrangements. Instead, B is about just their skill generally. I can't put either of these speakers on a yes or no to B because it's too broad. Neither of them even address that. C says futuristic science fiction has more promise as a source of social criticism than does conventional fiction. That was Litsina's conclusion. Priscilla disagreed with both Litsina's premise and her conclusion. Litsina says yes to C. Priscilla says no to C. That's why that's the answer for a disagree question. D says envisaging radically new technologies rather than radically new social arrangements is a shortcoming of futuristic science fiction. I don't like the word shortcoming there. Priscilla did, I think Priscilla probably agrees with D. Priscilla did basically say, well, they're good at envisaging the tech, but they're not so skillful when they envisage these social arrangements. But Litsina didn't even mention tech. And so I can't really put Litsina on a no for D. E, criticism of current social arrangements is not effective when those arrangements are contrasted with radically different ones. I think Litsina disagrees with that, but I don't see anywhere that Priscilla agrees with that. The answer here is C, because it wouldn't take me more than 10 seconds to make the case that Litsina has said yes to C and Priscilla has said no to C. It's fairly straightforward to make that case. So that's our answer. Next, harder logical reasoning is already in the chat. Go for it. S65, section 4, question 26. Because our club recruited the best volleyball players in the city, we will have the best team in the city. Not necessarily. What if you've got the world's worst coach? Or what if all of these best volleyball players in the city have never played together before and are terrible when combined? Super teams can fail for a lot of different reasons. Moreover, since the best team in the city will be the team most likely to win the city championship, that's a premise. They said the word since. So, I could argue with that. The best team doesn't always win. But they said, since this is true, they're going to reach a conclusion. So I'm going to grant them that the best team will win. You know what? I think I actually have to grant the first thing as well. They said, because we recruited the best volleyball players. Well, no, that's a little bit of logic there. So I don't have to grant that. Well, let me see. Their conclusion is our club will almost certainly be city champions this year. Lots of ways that argument can fail. My objections are the best players don't necessarily mean the best team. Even if you are the best team doesn't always win. And third, even if, notice exactly what they said. They said, since the best team in the city will be the team most likely to win the city championship, then they concluded our club will almost certainly be city champions. Any baseball fans? I'm a Dodger fan. I've got my Kenley Jansen bobblehead right here. The Dodgers are, well, they're the reigning world champs, and they're probably the best team, or at least a lot of people would say that they're the best team. And even if we grant that the Dodgers are the best team and that the best team is the most likely to win the World Series, most likely to win is not the same thing as almost certainly going to win. There are 30 teams. Even if they're like, maybe they're 5-1 or something like that to win the World Series, they're still only going to win in 1 out of 5 times because there's 30 teams. Okay, so I have lots of objections, which is good. The reasoning in the argument is flawed because the argument what? On a flaw question, I'm looking for what they did wrong. So the correct answer has to be something that I can prove they did, and it has to be a problem that they did it. A says, presumes without presenting relevant evidence that an entity can be distinguished as the best only on the basis of competition. They didn't even do that. They presented evidence that we have recruited the best players in the city. We don't know that this team has ever even played together. We're not relying just on their competitive record. We're relying on the fact that these are the best individual players in the city and then doing reasoning from there. So I think A misdescribes the argument. Not only that, but how else would you judge who is the best other than competition? That's why they play the games. So I don't see, even if they had done what A is describing, I have a hard time seeing how that would be a problem. So that answer looks wrong in a couple different ways. B, the argument predicts the success of an entity on the basis of features that are not relevant to the quality of that entity. I see that 11% of you thought that that was a good answer. What irrelevant qualities were brought up? Are you really going to make the case that the best players is an irrelevant quality if you're trying to judge the prowess of the team? Now, as I objected right off the bat, having the best players doesn't guarantee that you're the best team. But surely having the best players is relevant. So we can't pick B. C, predicts the outcome of a competition merely on the basis of a comparison between the parties in that competition. I suppose they did do that, but is that a flaw? Is that a problem? Like if someone said, hey, Nathan Fox, 5'11", is going to play one-on-one against LeBron James. You could compare those entities and you could predict the outcome. Why is that a logical problem? So if they did do C, it's just not a problem that they did that. D, did they presume without providing warrant that if an entity is the best among its competitors, then each individual part of that entity must also be the best? Tricky, but they did the reverse of that. So they said, because each of the parts is the best, the individual players are the best, therefore the team must be the best, which is certainly a flaw. That does not have to be true. But D misdescribes it. D says, if you're the best team, you have to have the best players. That's not what they did. They said, because we have the best players, we have the best team. So D is kind of on target, but it's backward. E says, concludes that because an event is the most likely of a set of possible events, that event is more likely to occur than not. Yes, they conflated being the team most likely to win. And again, there might be 1,000 teams in the competition. You might have a 1% chance of winning and still be the team most likely to win. They conflated that with, oh, if you're the team that's most likely to win, then you're probably going to win, which, you know, almost certainly. They meant like 90% or something likely to win, which just isn't true, depending on how many other entities there are in the field. The answer here is E, because they did what E is describing, and it's a big problem that they did it. A little bit of a tricky question because there were like 3 different flaws here. E describes the last of the 3 flaws that they committed, and that's the answer. How are we feeling about all that? I love teaching these classes so much. Time flies for me. I don't know how it is for you guys, but it flies by for me. The only thing we have left is a logic game, and it is already in the chat. Let me see if I want to give you any tips. Sometimes I like to give you a little tip. Ooh. Not that hard of a game, but also not that easy of a game. Game 4s tend to be more difficult than games 1 and 2 and even 3 on average. Game 4 is usually the hardest game in the section. This game is a little bit tricky. You're putting 5 things in order, but they're taking up 6 half-hour slots. I would encourage you to really focus on generations. Generations, not only is it a 1-hour program, so it's the different program, but it also has to start on the hour rather than the half hour. So there's really 2 rules here about generations. As it turns out, generations can only go in 3 places. It's an awful big block. So you might consider what happens in 3 different worlds when generations goes at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. I think that's where I'll probably start with this game. I'll be back in 5 or 6 minutes and do an explanation on my whiteboard. Good luck. I'm going to go ahead and dive in just so that I make sure I have enough time to do a full explanation and all of the questions for this one. It's test 65, game 4. A television programming director is scheduling a 3-hour block of programs beginning at 1 p.m. The programs include an hour-long program called Generations. We're just going to refer to that as G. And 4 half-hour programs, R, S, T, and W. The programs will be shown one after the other, each program shown exactly once. The schedule must meet the following constraints. Right off the bat, there's not really that much complexity here. We're putting 5 things in order, guys. How hard can it possibly be to put 5 things in order? Okay, that shouldn't be that tough. Now, it's a little quirky because we do have 6 half-hour slots and we have one of the 5 players, which takes up a full hour. The first rule says generation starts on the hour, G starts on the hour rather than the half hour. Again, we've got 1, 1:30, 2, 2:30, and 3, 3:30. Generations has to start on the hour, which means it has to start at 1 and take up that entire block, 2 and take up that entire hour, or 3 and take up that entire hour. And then you're left with 4 places. The reason why I chose G is that G was special. It's the only hour-long program, and it has to start on the hour. There's a specific rule that says it has to start on the hour. So I thought, well, let me at least just incorporate those 2 rules into 3 worlds. See what I've done? I've eliminated 2 rules at once. G does take up a full hour. G does start at either 1, 2, or 3. I don't have to worry about that anymore. The purpose of making worlds is to bake your rules into your solution so that you get to process fewer rules. Second rule says Terry starts on the half hour rather than the hour. So, okay, so Terry can be here or here. Terry can be here or here. Terry can be here or here. You know, generations blocks one of the half-hour spots, but otherwise there are 2 places where Terry can go. I might just do this with an arrow for Terry, or a handle or a link, a switch, whatever you want to call it. But that notation to me means Terry has to go here or here. Terry has to go here or here. Terry has to go here or here. I have baked that rule into my worlds, so I don't have to think about that as much anymore. I don't have to remember that. It's pictured. Third rule says R before S. Maybe I'll write that one down. You know, there's a lot of flexibility still in these 3 templates. R is going to have to be before S in all of the templates. You could make the inference, you know, that R can't go here or here or here, and S can't go here or here or here. But R before S, I can picture that pretty easily, that, you know, obviously R is not going last and S isn't going first. Last rule is a conditional rule. It says if W is shown earlier than T, it has to be immediately before T. And I don't have any like special technique or anything for that, but you know what that means is you've got 2 choices. You've either got T before W, in which case the rule doesn't apply, or you've got exactly WT in a block. Anytime W is before T, it's immediately before T. But it is also acceptable to have T before W, in which case they don't have to be touching. So what I've done there is I've sort of translated that conditional rule into an either or. You can't always do that, but here it seems like a pretty easy way to tackle that rule. Do I want to go any further, or do I want to go ahead and tackle the questions? I'm noticing now that T has been mentioned a couple times, and it might be worth, like, what happens in this world if T has to either be before W or it's immediately WT? That does have implications if T is last. If T's last, then W has to go next to last. And notice, actually, if T's here, W can go wherever it wants. When T's here, if W's here, that's fine. Or if W's here or here, that's also fine because it'll be T before W. Does that work out the same way in all three worlds? Because if it does, I'm going to have a much easier time of thinking about the TW rule. In this world, if T's here, yeah, same shit. W can go right here, that's WT, that's fine. Or W could go here or here while T's here, because that's T before W. But when T is last, then it has to be exactly WT. Same thing here. Yep, sure enough. If T's here, W can go wherever it wants. If T's here, then W has to go right here. Now, in real life, if I had unlimited scratch paper, I might go ahead and just split this based on where T goes, split this based on where T goes, split this based on where T goes. If I did that, it would completely eliminate that last rule, and all I would be left with is R before S. Notice that when T does go last, it's not just T's last, it's W goes next to last, and R before S has to fill in those remaining two spots. Same thing is going to happen here. When T's last, you're going to have R, S, W, T. Same thing is going to happen here. When T's fourth, you're going to have R, S, W, T. Whenever T is earlier, W becomes a wild card, and then you just have R before S. I think if you went that next step and actually made those splits, it would probably be pretty efficient. I can do that in my head, so maybe I won't do it. Let's see, number 17. Which one of the following could be the order in which the programs are shown from earliest to latest? For this type of question, I'm just going to test the rules and make sure that I have eliminated 4 wrong answers. So I'll start with G. G has to go first, third, or fifth. A has G first, B has G fifth, C has G fourth with only 1 half-hour program after it. That means G did not start on the hour, so C is eliminated. Both D and E have G last, which certainly works in one of my templates. T has to start on the half hour rather than the hour. This is a little tricky because G takes up a full hour. Okay, so you actually have to carefully go through each answer and think about what time it is when T starts. So A, generations takes up a full hour. Then RW takes up an hour. Oops, T starts on the hour, not the half hour in A. So A is eliminated, but not B. B says RSWTG. That's actually fine. G takes up the full hour, but it came after T. So we're in this template. T can go forth in that template. So B is okay, even though A was eliminated. D has Terry on the half hour. E has Terry on the half hour. Next rule, R before S. B has R before S. D has R before S. E has R and S out of order, so E's gone. Last rule, if W before T, it's immediately before T. So B is fine because it's W immediately before T. D is not fine. W is before T, but it's not immediately before T. That eliminates D. I've tested all the rules. I've eliminated A, C, D, and E. B is the only answer still standing, so B is the answer. Number 18 says, if Waterloo is first, then what happens? Well, Waterloo can't be first in this template. In order for Waterloo to be first, we have to be here or here. In both cases, Waterloo is going to be before Terry, which means it has to be immediately before Terry. So I think it works here. If we go WTGRS, and it also works here if we go WTRSG. It works in this world and this world, but there's only going to be one way of doing it in each of those worlds. So there's a total of 2 different ways of making W first. And the answer for number 18 is B. Number 19 says, what happens when R is second? R could definitely be second here. And R could be second here. I'm going to do something that I normally wouldn't do. On the real test, I would write out new diagrams, but because I'm working with limited whiteboard space, I'm going to use my red pen. In this world, if I make R second, I guess I still have some flexibility. You could go TWS. I think you could also go SWT. I think either of those would work. Here, I don't think you can put R second, because if you put R second, then T's last, which means W has to be right before it, which leaves only the first spot for S, which would be S before R, which wouldn't work. So we're not in this world if we're putting R second. In this world, oh, same thing. If we put R second, T goes here, W goes here, S goes before R. That's not going to work. So we're in this world. If R is second, G has to be first. And if this is a must be true question, that'll be the answer. It says, if R is second, each of the following could be true except. Can I make Sundown third? Yes, I can. Can I make Sundown fourth? No, it's gonna be W in both cases, interestingly. Unless I messed up. Terry is fifth. Yeah, that works. Waterloo is third. Well, not in these diagrams. In these diagrams, Waterloo is, it's at 3 o'clock, but it's fourth both times. E says Waterloo is fifth. No, it can't. I clearly messed up somewhere. There are other solutions that I did not anticipate. I know that these work, but there must be other worlds in which I can put R second. So what did I do wrong? R as the second program. Somebody want to bail me out? In the chat, I see GRTSW. Oh. Oh, because it's T before W. In this world right here, that's what I did wrong. It was just one little misstep. One really interesting thing about the games is that they will make absolutely no sense if you make one tiny little misstep, but then as soon as you see what your misstep was, you realize, oh, yeah, I was basically right. I can't put R here. I can't put R here. I know I'm in this world, but the thing I did wrong is that when T is second, when T is last, you definitely have to have W there and you have to have S there. But when T is second, then it doesn't matter. T is before W. So these two spaces can be S and W in either order. The only thing I missed there was the handle. I thought it had to be exactly TW, but it doesn't. It can be TSW or TWS. Now, which one of the following must be false? A, Sundown is third. That could be true. Sundown is fourth. Could be true. Terry is fifth. Could be true. Waterloo is third. No, it can be fourth or fifth, but it can't be third. So that's going to be our answer. Waterloo is fifth. Yeah, that can be true. I was like 99% right, but that's not good enough. You know, I made one step too far where I thought that W had to be before S, but it just doesn't. And that's why, you know, it's like maybe I tried to go 10% too fast, and it ended up costing me 5 minutes to sort out that error. So the takeaway there is just calm, careful, safety first. Don't make the goof that I just made. Number 20 says, what happens when Sundown is third? Well, I do have an example of Sundown being third right here. It would have to be G. That's when R was second. It was GRSWT. Sundown is not the third program in our second world because this is a program, and G is the third program. I do think that Sundown can be third in this world. If I was going to do that, I guess you still have a little bit of flexibility. You could put R here, then TSW. Or I think you could put T here. Then you get R and W. Oh, wait, that doesn't work. If T is down here, no, that doesn't work because you have W before T without having exactly WT. So that actually doesn't work. Okay, I have a couple examples of it working. Which one of the following has to be true in both of those templates? G first? No, because it works down here. R first? No, because it works up here. R second? No, because it can be first. Terry is fifth. No, it could be G. Waterloo fourth. To put S third, I saw GRSWT and RTSWG. In both of those, W is fourth, which is enough for me to conclude that number 20, E, is the correct answer. 21 says, what happens when G is third? G third puts me into this template. I don't really know what happens. I mean, I didn't make any inferences in that world. Which one of the following could be true? Can R be second? You know, I actually inferred this earlier. This world, you can't put R second because you'd have to have RWT, which would put S before R. So that cannot be true. Oh, wait a second. I'm in the wrong world. My bad. Let me start over. When G is third, if G is third, that's here. It didn't say G at 3 o'clock. It said if G is third. When G is third, I'm here. Okay, can R be second? Again, same thing, no. It's really hard for R to go second. If R goes second, T goes down here, W goes here, S goes here, that's R, S before R, so that won't work. How about R fifth? No, R can never go fifth because R goes before S. How about S fourth? Seems possible. I'd want to put T here, S here, W here, R here. T's on the half hour, R's before S, T's before W, so I don't have to worry about that rule. This works, so that's the answer. Could T go fourth in this world? No, generations is third. T has to be either second or fifth. How about could Waterloo be second? No, because you can't put T before that. If you put Waterloo here and T here, then you wouldn't have WT. So the answer for number 21 is C. Just a couple more. Okay, all the if questions were in a row there, 18 through 21. So number 22, which one of the following cannot ever be true? A says S immediately before G. I don't know, R likes to go before S in this world especially. Why can't I put S here? WTRS would work. No, S can be immediately before G. How about W immediately before R? I haven't ever seen that happen in any of my previous templates. W immediately before R. See, the problem is if W is immediately before R, then you don't have WT. So to have W immediately before R, we would need T before W immediately before R, and that has to go before S. Can you fit this in while also putting T on the half hour? No, you can't, because if G went first, T would be at 2 o'clock. If G went second, G wouldn't even be on the hour, and T would be on the hour. And same thing, if you put G here or here, T is going to be starting at 1 o'clock, which doesn't work. So the answer for number 22 is B. You're never going to end up with W immediately before R, because you need T before WR before S. Breaks the game. Number 22B. Number 23, last one. Which one of the following, if substituted for the constraint that G starts on the hour rather than the half hour, would have the same effect in determining the order in which the programs are shown? These rule substitution questions tend to be the hardest types of questions. We have a whole lesson on that inside Daemon Premium and Daemon Live. You have permission to just skip that question if you're like, let's say you're averaging 15 or 18 points on a typical section of games. You don't need to bother with these rule substitution questions. That said, sometimes you can predict the answer. Here, I don't really have much of a prediction. Other times, you can skim the answer choices and you can just see that an answer clearly has the exact same effect. So A says G is not shown immediately before T. That is true. According to my starting setup, I'm never going to have G immediately before T. But how does that keep G from being at 1:30 or 2:30? I don't think A introduces any new restriction, but I do think that A fails to replicate the old restriction, and that's why A is out. B says generations has to be either the first program or the fifth. No, it doesn't. G could be the third program. I can't pick B because B creates a new restriction in the game. It's extra. So it changes the game. I want a rule that doesn't change the game. I want a rule that has no more and no less effect than the old rule. Oh, okay. And by the time I see C, it's actually pretty clear. If G can't be the second or the fourth program, then it has to be first, third, or fifth. And if it's first, third, or fifth, then it's going to start on the hour. I know that G has to be first, third, or fifth. So saying G starts on the hour has the same effect as saying G can't go second or fourth. It's a perfect replication of the rule. So the answer here is C. Let me just eliminate D and E for those of you who are interested. D says if generations is shown third, then Roman is shown first. That doesn't have to be true. Here, generations is third, and I see no reason why R has to be first. In fact, I know it can be fourth in that template. E, if generations is not shown first, then it is shown later than Terry. No, generations can be here, not first, while Terry is last. So E doesn't have to be true according to the starting conditions either. C is the only answer that keeps G on the hour without also introducing any other new restrictions. So that's why the answer is C for this rule substitution question. And that's the game. Sorry for going over. Any questions, comments before we wrap it up? Abigail, Claire, anything for me? Anything I missed in the chat? Anything that I need to remember to talk about?
Nothing that I know of, but Abigail, let me know.
No, I don't think so.
Question.
We covered all the questions in the chat.
Excuse me, I have a question about test 65, section 4, question 26, really quickly. Question. It's the one we just did a few moments ago.
The logical
reasoning. Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. As you mentioned, C could have been an answer as well as E. I had both of those.
Hey, what? That's not what I said. There's no way I said C could also have been the answer.
You mentioned that you could understand why some people would select that one or something like that, because it was, yes, it was something like, you didn't say those words exactly, but you did make it clear that E was the answer.
What I said was, I can see why people would be tricked by C, because for that question, C is something that the author did.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that clarity. What can we do? What would you recommend that we do to make sure that we're not tricked like that in the future? Because I had both of those and I didn't know which one. And I did go with
the analysis for a flaw question.
I didn't hear the question, sorry.
What is your analysis for a flaw question? What are you supposed to be doing on a flaw question? How do you know that the right answer is right on a flaw question?
I'm new here, so I mean, yes, I'm still learning to answer to that.
On a flaw question, we are looking for two things. Something that the author did wrong. So C is tricky because they did what C is describing, but C is not the answer because it's not a problem that they did it. Of course, you can look at the two, like imagine a fight. You've got somebody that's 6'9", 300 pounds and somebody who's 4'10", 90 pounds. You look at those two, they're going to fight in a cage match. You look at those two and you go, I'll take the big guy. That is predicting the outcome of a competition merely on the basis of a comparison between the parties in that competition. But are you really going to tell me that that's not a reasonable thing to conclude or not a reasonable thing to do? So even though the author did what C is describing, it's not the answer for this flaw question because it's just not logically flawed. So on a flaw question, what did they do wrong? And it's just not wrong that they did what C is describing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. The reason that you just shared for the reason why C is wrong is why, well, it was my thinking in choosing C over E. It was my thinking that E was wrong for that same reason. But I understand what you're saying. I was thinking that just because they said that, basically I was thinking the reverse. So yes, no, I hear what you're saying, but
I'm not sure you do. E, and I appreciate your question, but I've been doing this for too long to just accept when students like say, I get it, and I don't believe them. I don't believe you quite yet. The reason why E is wrong is because it is a stupid thing to do. We don't know how many teams there are in this volleyball league. If there are 100 teams in the volleyball league, then yeah, one team could be clearly the best team, but that doesn't mean that they're more likely than not. It certainly doesn't mean that they are almost certainly going to be the city champions. I mean, think about like the NCAA tournament. You got 64 teams, or maybe it's more now with the weird play-in games or whatever they do. But the point is, you got 64 teams. The best team does not have to win that tournament. They could be clearly the team that is the most likely to win, and they still might have only like a 20% chance of winning the tournament. So E is an objective flaw of reasoning. Just because you're the most likely team to win does not mean that you are almost certainly going to win. That's what E is describing. That's what this author did. That's why that's the answer. C is not even a logical flaw. Looking at the parties in a competition, comparing those parties in a competition, and making a prediction about who you think is going to win is not a logical flaw. Did that help at all?
Yes, I think it goes back to, I'm not sure if it was Monday or another time where we were on and I was kind of thinking outside of the box, so to speak. And I think that meaning one of my reasons for selecting C was that, well, we don't know whether or not, I'm reading it again, it's outcome of a competition really on the basis of a comparison between the parties of that competition. So we don't know what if one of the star players gets sick or something happens to them. So I wasn't just reading the question, I was thinking about other factors as well. So perhaps that's where I was coming from. So, but I understand what you're saying in that E is the correct answer because not only does it say what the flaw, what the person did, what the writer did, but also it clearly states the flaw in the argument.
Let me ask you one more time.
Okay.
What's the analysis on a flaw question?
1, what can we say that the author did? And 2, what did they do wrong? Is that?
Yes, something that they did, and it's wrong for them to do that thing. And C fails on that second point. It's just not wrong to predict the outcome of a competition on the basis of a comparison between the parties in that competition.
Okay.
If the Los Angeles Lakers are going to play the Ripon High School Indians in a game of basketball, you can look at the Lakers and you can look at the Ripon Indians and you can say, I'll take the Lakers. And it is not a logical flaw to predict the outcome of that game by looking at the two teams. So yes, the author did what C is describing, but it's just not wrong that they did it. And that's why the answer is not C. All right, thank you for all of your questions and all your participation. We got all kinds of options for you if you want to study with us at the Demon. The free version of the Demon, I think, is the best free LSAT prep that exists. We've got tons of questions, we got tons of videos, we got tons of written explanations, we've got multiple versions of this recorded live class that you can watch for free, participate in for free anytime. So that's Demon free. Demon Basic allows you access to the Demon's drilling and explanations 24 hours a day. Demon Premium and Live start giving you live classes. For Demon Live subscribers, we have multiple live classes happening every single day of the week. I think it's a screaming bargain for $295 a month that you could go to multiple live classes every single day. So if you are going to devote financial resources to LSAT prep, I hope that you will study with us here at the Demon. If you have no financial resources, I hope you still will study with us at the Demon, because we've got lots of good stuff for you for free as well. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Claire. Thanks everybody for showing up. I'll be back tonight, actually only a few hours from now, for another version of this same class with entirely different questions. I'll see some of you there. Bye.